Just a few seconds here. Go blast off. Okay, good afternoon. Lee's back at you with a busy Wall Street Journal news day. And yes, there's news that's not about the president getting COVID. There's lots of news that's not about the president getting COVID. I know you're shocked. I know you're very surprised, but there really is. And so there really is. So I'll start with the COVID-19 news that the President Trump and his wife got COVID very briefly, but I'm willing to sit back for a day and see how this news filters out, as I usually am. Sometimes very quick to respond is very dangerous, as we've learned. But I would pose the question to you that if you look at the president's close contacts right now, how do you think that contact tracing effort is going on right now? Do you think there's a lot of effort figuring out where this came from? Oh, yeah. Do you think there's some security people involved? Oh, yeah. I think there's some security people involved. So when they find the one, I call it the one, that's the one where the source was, where we figured out where Trump and his wife, by the way, there's a lot of clues, right? Both him and his wife got it, but their son didn't get it. I don't know. I don't know where we haven't seen their son bearing around in a while. Maybe he's tied up in school and really separated from the family. But so there is a clue that since both the wife and President Trump got it, that would tell you a little bit about contract tracing. So, but how'd you like to be the one that they find out this is the one that gave the president, in the middle of the fight of his life for re-election, gave him the COVID? It's still to be determined whether this is going to hurt President Trump's chances or not. I think a lot of those comments are pretty premature. There's certainly 40% of the country right now that hopes it'll hurt his chance, and 40% that hopes it'll help. But so then the other question you got to ask is, you do this contact tracing, you conspiracy people, you got to ask yourself, what if this was delivered to him? And then if you deliver the COVID to him to make sure he gets it in the final few weeks before the election, how would you do it? It's interesting because maybe what ask the scientists how they would do it, because a lot of what we know about COVID is still unknown. We still can't figure out the masks, and it would appear that the only reason Trump was wearing a mask was to prevent other people from getting COVID from him. Well, now he has it, so it would work. It's the conspiracy angle is interesting, and I'd like to hear more about it, hear your comments about it. But how would you do it? That's why I think we ought to ask the scientists, make it painfully aware when we say, okay, if you wanted to attack the president with COVID, exactly how would you do it? I think I'd find someone that's real close to the president, that the president meets every day, and give it to that person. But how would I give it to that person? We've never thought about this before. We're taking steps to prevent us from getting it. Washing our hands frequently, wearing masks. That's basically it. Some of you are taking zinc, and some of you taking vitamin D, and go for it. But how would you really deliver it in a package? And I think that's interesting thought. So number one article, I'm not going to call the Trump COVID thing even one of my articles today. California's determine who sits on private company boards. Now, 2 years ago, they set up female quotas. Those have been pretty painless for California boards. I think most boards were heading in that direction already. And there were enough female candidates out there that that brought a lot to the boards, and they're well on their way of doing that. So now California has said by a huge margin. I forgot the vote was 58-4 or something, huge margin to now you got to have one diverse candidate by 2021. Now you say, you'll read a lot of these articles, they'll say they've got to be a Black American. That's not true. So diversity is in the eye of the beholder, and it's got to be either Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native American. There's 3 or 4 other categories in there, or gay, lesbian, bisexual, etc. And I'm waiting for some company boards to all of a sudden have a board member come out as gay, and we'll solve the problem all night. All right. It reminds me of when I was working on diversity in my organization of around 150 people, that I had a person working for me who I believed was Hispanic, but wasn't listed as Hispanic. And I addressed that with the person, said, maybe we have an error in our reporting system. And she informed me that no, we didn't have an issue, that she was not Hispanic. Now, she was Hispanic by every definition, except the one that matters, and that's self-declared. And by the way, that's how the system works, in case you don't understand it. If you decide you're not Hispanic, or you decide you're Black, you're Black. It's self-described. So we'll see what happens with these boards as it goes forward. He said right now they believe that of the 513 public companies, 35% of them don't meet this requirement of having a diverse person on the board. So now come the decisions. So first of all, do you stay in California anymore? As a private company, do you say, I don't want to become a public company and have the government run my business? So maybe this is a tipping point that says, let's get out of this state. It will only continue, right? What's the next step that they're going to require, right? It can't end here, right? So as an exit plan, you decide to get out. So then maybe you say, okay, do we stay with the same size board? That's a critical decision. Big boards get unwieldy and can't get things done. So do I add somebody to the board, and I go find one of these people that fit this description? If I don't, then who goes? Nobody ever thought of this. When this diverse person comes in, we now discriminate against probably a white man, right? But that's okay. That's what we do, and we've been doing that in college for years, and everything's okay with that. Everybody's okay. So now, who do you bring in, and then who do you let go? And we haven't thought about that a lot. And that's why I'm here to run this program. I want you to think about things that other people in the news aren't thinking about. And by the way, that people have brought up the fact in the article, I brought up that, can you even measure it? How do you measure success? And obviously people who wrote this law never looked at this. And as near as I can tell, the measurement, the quantification is not in the law. Few companies even disclose their ethnic makeup of boards. I think just 13% of the S&P 500 disclose their ethnic makeup. So this can be a problem. And then once you get on the board, let's say you're one of the diverse persons, or in the last 2 years, one of the female candidates that have been brought on. Here's the issue I see. When you're sitting around a board, and if I'm on that board, and what I'm looking for is diversity of thought, right? And people that bring something to the board. So the question I would have is, this female person came on, and this diverse person, whoever they may be, Hispanic, Black, gay, lesbian. I'm going to say, what did you bring to this board? What do you bring? I remember working with a board member specifically, and everybody on that board knew the background he had. He actually was on a technology board, but he was very technical. And many of the other board members were not. And they looked to him when issues got to be very technical. So the question is, what did you bring to this board? Now, What's under the surface is what you brought to the board is diversity. So therefore, unless the subject is about diversity, I'm not sure why you're on this board. That would be a mistake, I think, for a lot of people. But will that happen? And this is the problem when you force diversity into an organization without handling the human interactions that normally occur. Normally, somebody's brought forth to the board because they've got unique skills in a certain area or unique experiences that can be shared with the rest of the board members. Okay, let's switch to Florida. Felons can't vote. So Florida is one of the states that recently had a referendum, by the way, a public referendum to get felons to vote. And it gave the right to vote to felons if they had served their term. So the legislature then fixed that and said, well, they've served their term and it requires the felons to pay their fines because, there's two parts of the sentence. A lot of people don't realize this. There's the fines involved in it, sometimes just court fines, a few $100s, or maybe there's fines to take care of victims in the criminal case, and then of course there may be a prison sentence, and there's the combination of the two, or one or the other by themselves. So, and by the way, this is a substantial issue. And it was highlighted recently by a famous presidential candidate on the Democratic side saying he was going to go pay fines for, thousands of felons in Florida so they could vote. Obviously, he believed, and I think statistics has shown that most felons, by a large percentage, vote Democratic. Felons vote Democratic. And that has nothing to do with them being felons, by the way. I think it has to be doing with the class of people that they come from and what that group of people typically vote. So, but this is a huge problem. There's 14,000 people in Florida registered to vote with felony records. 9,700 of them still owe money. 69% still owe money. So those wouldn't be qualified to vote. So, and by the way, the people that have these fines are finding it difficult to determine their fines, because if it was in different cities and different counties, it's in different records. There's no statewide system to track fines. And so many of these criminals, past criminals, by the way, forgiven criminals, and they've served their, and by the way, I agree with this. I think felons ought to get, personally, I agree with this. Felons ought to get their right to vote back. So in my question here, my observations on this is, why are we allowing, by the way, billions of dollars in Florida is owed on fines. And so why are we allowing this? So Florida does have a thing where they can suspend your driver's license. I suspect, like a lot of things, that doesn't work. You just drive on a suspended license because you're at the low end of the pay scale. You can't hire attorneys to go fight this, or pay the fine. So, and you got to keep driving to keep work, and keep your family fed if you have one. So, they noted a lady. They gave an example of Ms. Garrison, 20-year-old convictions that have been cleared 20 years ago, right? But she still owes $870. She said she didn't know about it. I find that convenient, I guess, and maybe interesting at the same time. But of course, what it means is the state wasn't, either she's lying or the state wasn't taking steps to try to collect that money. I suspect the latter is true. So why not attach to income? And maybe it's not a lot a month, but maybe it makes regular payers, maybe it's $20 a month, a small amount, but they start paying their fines back to society. So you've heard a lot about this, felons being able to vote. Well, not so fast in Florida. Poor hospital data. So there was an issue in the pandemic where statewide and nationwide data on open hospital beds was unavailable or very inaccurate. And so they developed systems that you report daily to the CDC. And it's interesting, they looked at that data, and some hospitals reported the same data every day. Now, that's a made up number that they picked, and they said, look, this is our job, call it in every day, but it's not accurate. We know it's not accurate, and we don't care. So that tells you the system is not working. And by the way, in these days of electronic hospital records, EHR, we call them, this is crazy, right? So, and by the way, in the US, there's no system that connects all hospitals. And by the way, this is one of the things you got to be careful when you compare the United States to other countries. Other countries like the UK, and we say, well, they handled the peak pandemic differently. Well, in the UK, all the hospital systems are connected. It's all nationalized healthcare, unless you're in the private side of it, right? And you've got some money, but really they're all connected. And a lot of these other small countries are the same way. US is much different in that way. So the hospital data is not connected and not available. And by the way, it's very difficult. I talked to one local nurse, and how do you account? The emergency room can have 3 or 4 people on beds in the hallway. They're not really hospital beds, right? They weren't before. They never were counted, and maybe they're waiting for a real bed. So how do you count them? I think it'd be interesting to look into their Epic hospital records and see what that is. By the way, Dr. Birx, and many of you remember Dr. Birx from Trump's infamous daily COVID announcements with the scientists. She says it's easier to get HIV data from clinics in Africa than hospital data in the US. That's sad. That's sad. So, in one hospital said on average they were making 40 telephone calls to place one COVID patient when the hospital was full. And by the way, this points out the problem we had. We had hospitals that were full, and a new patient would come in, and they've got to figure out where to send that patient to. Without data from other hospitals, they have no idea. And so now somebody's on the phone calling hospital after hospital. And by the way, probably at the time, well, and it actually article talks, some hospitals are running around daily and counting beds. Here's my solution I would have done. President, bring in the CEOs from the 5 to the 10 major hospital systems. Bring them into a room and say, guys, you own EHR for hundreds and hundreds, and sometimes thousands of hospital systems. In the case of Epic, it's huge. So you own all these hospital systems. You guys interchange data with different people all the time. And combine these systems so that we can get reporting out of them at a nationwide level and a statewide level. So fix it, and fix it now. Just like he brought in GM and Ford and said, start making ventilators. He could have brought these major CEOs in. By the way, the 10 largest electronic health records, EHR companies, have 90% of the market. That's in 2013. I think that would be much bigger than that now. The 3 largest have 50% of the market. So the 3 largest could cover 50% of the data requirements that we needed very quickly. And I think the data is in the system. If these EHR people can't figure out how many beds are occupied at any given time, by the way, they could be dynamic where we had once daily reporting. We could have reporting every hour, every 2 hours, so on. So, and by the way, remember when Obama did Obamacare, there was $14 billion in incentives to hospitals to go EHR. So as soon as they brought these EHR systems, and they spent tons doing it. I know I worked in that industry. I helped bring NYU in New York helped bring EHR to that hospital. And so they're paid large incentives to put these systems in place. Now it's time to go use them. And I think the president wasted an effort, wasted a chance to go solve a major problem going forward that would help us in the next pandemic. Fourth article, Amy Barrett's standard. So those of you who remember Title IX claims, expanded into sexual assault. And really in Obama era, he really went after colleges and said, you have got to fix this and fix this quickly. And they did. So the case that went to the appeals court that Amy Barrett was on was two Purdue students, a girlfriend, boyfriend, and the boyfriend actually reported that the girlfriend had tried a suicide attempt, and then so the girlfriend claimed that the boy had sexually assaulted her when she was asleep. So she didn't write the complaint up, by the way, to the university. A campus group did, okay? And they wrote the statement up. She never appeared in the hearing at all, the girl that made the claim, okay? And then the boyfriend that supposedly assaulted her was never allowed to see the claims and respond to them. And it resulted in him being guilty. He was kicked out of school and kicked out of a ROTC program, ROTC, that said really ruined his career. And he took that to the appeals court and he won. And so where does Amy come into this? Well, so she was on the appeals court when it came to her three-member appeals court, 2 or 3. I could be wrong on that. And she spent 9 months writing a 30-page ruling on this case. And it did 2 things. First of all, it gave a standard for colleges to use to evaluate sexual claims in Title IX cases. And second, and this is more important, it gave a quality standard to other appeals court judges to use in similar cases. And multiple other appeals courts have already used her standards. So when you look at the Supreme Court, they do 2 things. They decide a case, but people forget about the second piece of this. And this is very important. I'd say as a teacher, listen now. So Supreme Court decides a case and decides who wins or loses, but they also give guidance to the lower courts when these typical cases come up. And Amy Barrett has showed that in a very tough area around sexual assault cases in Title IX claims, that she can be very careful, taking her time, 9 months, writing a very good standard that multiple other appeals courts use and use it very successfully and find that it meets the standards under Title IX. So a good thing to say for Amy Barrett. Number 5, quickly, second quarter auto sales are up. Well, what we really mean are truck sales and SUV sales up. GM second quarter sales only fell 10% compared to last year. And you say, Lee, you just said car sales are up. Well, they were down 34% the prior quarter. So they made some recovery. They're not back to where they were last year, but they made recovery. Fiat had the same thing. They only fell 10% this quarter. They fell 39% first quarter. So, by the way, almost all the increase is in trucks and SUVs. The annual rate, they think the U.S. will produce 15 million trucks and cars this year. Of that 15 million, 12 million will be trucks and SUVs. Next time you're out on the road driving around, just look and count SUVs, trucks versus cars. Cars are becoming sometimes I'll count 5 vehicles before I get to a car. And there really are becoming the minority vehicles out there. Oh, interesting one. 6th article. Subway bread is not really bread in Ireland. So in Ireland, to be defined as bread, it has to have a sugar content of less than 2% of its weight. I'd never heard of this before. It's news to me. Less than 2%. Subway white bread, 10% sugar weight. 10% of the weight is in sugar on their white bread. So therefore, Subway's been told by the Irish that they can't advertise this or sell it as bread. I don't know what they're going to call it in the future. I have no idea. But are you surprised? Are you surprised that 10% of Subway's white bread is sugar? I was. If you'd have told me 2 to 3%, I would have bought that. But 10% I think seems high. Last article, you've heard of this Nikola, Nikola, truck founder that GM has started working with, and they've had a recent issue because their founder, CEO and founder, had to leave the company, and a lot of misstating what Nikola has been able to do and their abilities and so on. But interesting enough, Wall Street Journal dug into this. And by the way, we're missing this. We're missing journalists that really dig into these things and find out what's really going on and why aren't we. And so Wall Street Journal dug into this guy. This guy's never had a successful company whatsoever. And he really shows up on the scene in the early 2000s. Ran a security franchise for a while and sold it and immediately got sued by the buyer, saying that he'd way overstated. He even said one of the large customers, they were only bidding on this customer and he counted it as a customer. So in multiple startups this guy's had, he's a great salesman, and but no successes, none whatsoever. And now he's running this huge company that is valued bigger than Ford, and nobody is raising their hand saying, excuse me, maybe the guy's hit on a winner right now, but every one of his other endeavors has been losers. And by the way, all are in court. If you follow every single one of his companies after he got rid of them, they all went to court after he got rid of them. That tells you somebody and Danny's sending me a note here that I don't understand, but he'll explain it. CherylAtkinson.com. I'm sure maybe she's talked about this subject, maybe. So this guy's had no success. So people are investing tons of money into this because it's electric and it's electric trucks. It's exciting. By the way, the truck he showed that maybe is, in fact, I should have shown it this morning, that he showed in all the media press release, all lit up on stage, beautiful looking electric truck, said they had an extension cord to power the headlights and the lights in the interior. There's an extension cord running off the stage to run this. So, okay, I'll add Danny's comment here. One of the few former MSM media journalists, now independent, that does dig in further. You'd be shocked to hear later podcast. Okay, so I'll follow that up, Danny. Great comment. I shouldn't. There are some great journalists out there, but few and far between. Most of them are regurgitating somebody else's news, and I'd like to see someone dig into this. By the way, this truck that he started with, Nikola, started with this diesel natural gas combination that he couldn't prove worked. Then he went to the hydrogen because somebody told him that, that was zero emissions and it would get a lot of attention in the marketplace. When he switched to the hydrogen model, his company didn't have a single expert that knew anything about hydrogen powered vehicles. And so why didn't they know that? By the way, are you surprised? No, I think we're not surprised. We might have been surprised by Subway bread being 10% sugar, but we weren't surprised that Nikola truck comes up out of nowhere, gains all this market capitalization, and the guy running it has never done anything, close to success in his life, and he's showing products that look great but have nothing underneath them. Okay, the king has no clothes, right? As the kids said, the only one on the whole parade route that said, "Excuse me, the king has no clothes." So that's it for today. 7 articles and a little bit on the president getting COVID. Hope you enjoyed and appreciate the comments, everybody. Danny, Joe, others commented. Appreciate it. And have a great day. I'll see you Saturday for an update again. Cheers.